Hello, everyone. So for my presentation, I'm going to be talking about doing anti-oppressive practice with survivors of sexual assault. So some terms that might come up in the course of this presentation are anti-oppressive practice, sexual assault, mental health, power, tonic immobility, or the freeze response, choice, consent, empowerment, survivor/victim, and trauma-informed approach. So what is anti-oppressive practice? According to Donna Baines, a pioneer in talking about anti-oppressive practice, it is an umbrella term for many social justice-oriented approaches. So I'm going to go through this definition. I'm going to read through it. It's a bit lengthy, kind of a mouthful, but hopefully I'll be able to send out the presentation so you can ponder on it on your own time. Um, Anti-oppressive practice is a social justice-oriented practice model currently taught in a number of schools of social work. Its strength grows primarily from its compassionate embrace of humanity in all its diversity and adversity, and its wholehearted commitment to social justice in the immediate and long term. It attempts to analyze how power works to oppress and marginalize people, as well as how power can be used to liberate and empower them across a wide range of social settings, relations, environments, and systems. So sexual assault defined as per the criminal code, an assault committed in circumstances of a sexual nature such that the sexual integrity of the victim is violated. There are three levels. So level one involves minor physical injuries or no injuries to the victim. And then there is level two. It's sexual assault is with a weapon, threats, or causing bodily harm. And in level three, aggravated sexual assault, so sexual assault that results in wounding, maiming, disfiguring, or endangering the life of the victim. Some impacts of sexual assault that I'd like to go through. It can change the trajectory of the survivor's mental or physical health, right? I see this a lot in my practice based on like survivors' testimonies or things that they talk about in practice is quite evident. And there are many research on this as well, how it affects mental health. I believe I did a paper some time ago, and it was speaking about childhood sexual abuse, but depression was something that was identified in adult survivors, right? So we know for sure that mental health and physical health, based on the ACE study, if you're familiar with that, so the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, you can find a lot of information on that as it relates to just how sexual assault affects the survivor's mental and physical health. The window of tolerance, so that changes. And the window of tolerance, I'll speak more about that on the next slide. It's literally a tool that is used, so I'll just read here. So it provides a framework for understanding psychological and emotional responses to daily life stressors. Sexual violence or sexual assault is definitely a life stressor for sure. So struggles with self-esteem. Again, there's research on this, but that's something that always also comes up in my practice. This question is actually in on my intake form. Trust is another one that comes up quite a bit for clients, and PTSD, according to the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services, that is another impact of sexual assault. So the window of tolerance, to explain it, like how I explain it to my clients is, if you were to picture a window, you have your window. At the top of the window is hyperarousal, as it says in the picture here, and hypoarousal is on the lower part of the window. So without trauma in our lives, the understanding is that we are in our window, we know how to self-regulate, we are flexible. When life throws us curveballs, we pick up and we keep it moving. But when trauma happens, it kind of makes our window a little bit smaller, if that makes sense. And so sometimes some people, they react by becoming hyper aroused, and as it's listed here, you have high energy, anxiety, you fight flight, chaotic, or hypoarousal is like shut down, you're numb, depression seems to creep in, or you freeze. So those are some of the reactions that can happen at different levels in the window. And through the work that we do, which we'll talk about at the tail end of this presentation, what we want to do is to support survivors to find themselves back in their window. Let me see if I skip. Okay, no. All right, so things to note, and I feel like what I'm about to say is literally the premise of why I chose this topic to begin with. So, working with victims of sexual violence or survivors, I like to call them, of sexual violence, it it is quite evident that the criminal justice system does not always support victims of this crime, right? So it is, as they've said here, it is a gendered violent crime prone to high levels of underreporting and low case retention in Canadian criminal justice system. There's little convictions. There's a lot of clients who will say to you, I probably don't even want to go to court because what I've heard is they re-victimize you in there and you don't get justice, right? So it is that's often the result, and it's sad, really. Research said that 1 in 4 Albertans experienced sexual assault when they were over the age of 18. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of statistics here, just to kind of talk about in Canada what that is like. So in Canada, overall, generally, from Statistics Canada, it is said that more than 33% of women have been sexually assaulted, while 10 to 20% of all males will experience some form of sexual abuse. And then to kind of bring it back to percentage wise in Alberta. So Canada is 33% for women, but in Alberta it's 41% for women. And Canada is 10 to 20% for men, and in Alberta it's 17%. So it kind of brings again why this topic is important, because we are all social workers. Not all of us work in Alberta. I do. That's why this is very much important to me. And I also work with survivors right now. So yeah. So just a little bit more on statistics here. So this is a figure I pulled from Statistics Canada's website, and it just shows like reporting, like what happens in reporting over the years so in 1999, just within a 12-month period. So as we can see here, the light blues for women, the darker blues for men, and it just shows reporting. Reporting has gone up in 2018, and a very recent article, I believe it's CBC, is saying that reporting has gone up even more in this year during this pandemic. So again, it speaks to the importance of this topic. So we're gonna go to, I think what I would say is one of the most heart-wrenching thing for me as a person who works in this field is why survivors do not want to report. There's two sides to it for me. For one, you, a survivor, should be allowed to decide if they want to report or not. Choice is important because power was taken from them. I'll talk a lot more about this further on, but power was taken from them. So the decision to report should be on them. But if we want to understand better why justice is not served in the context of the criminal justice system, because survivors a lot of times do not want to talk about it for many reasons. Some of them that are not on here that I can think of is just the shame, the blame, the guilt that comes from it. But so tonic immobility, the freeze response, I mentioned it as one of the terms earlier. I will play a video that speaks to what tonic immobility really and truly means and what it is in relation to sexual violence. It is one of your body's natural response when it comes on to trauma or being in danger. For example, if you pictured going for a walk on a trail and you saw a bear, would you run? Would you fight? Or would you freeze? So the freeze response, a term that is used is tonic immobility. So I'm going to play this video here. Yes, this is just loading. It's taking its own little time to load here.
Hey everybody, today is day 1 of the sexual abuse and sexual violence awareness.
I am sorry, my internet is doing its own thing here.
This week, 2017. And the topic for today is she should have fought back. This is one of the most common reactions that you hear from people when there is an event of sexual assault or rape. In this video, I'll be explaining why this is a stupid misconception and it needs to go. Hashtag it's not okay. Let me begin by saying that many people say this, including lawyers and doctors, that when there's a case of sexual assault, there will always be bruises and cuts and some kind of evidence on the body of the victim. But this is a huge misconception because people think that if the victim was trying to escape, they would have gotten hurt somehow. But the reaction of a victim to rape is not always the typical one which you see in the movies where the victim is fighting back. We have most commonly seen that the reaction to rape or sexual assault is flight or fight, which means a victim will either fight with all her might or his might, or the person will try to run away. But actually, there's a third response as well, which is called the freeze response. The freeze response is a documented neurobiological condition, also referred to as tonic immobility. What it is tonic immobility is an autonomic mammalian response that happens in extremely fearful situations. It is not something that a person has control over, and if you think this information is fake, please check it out with your medical references and you will know what I'm talking about. Research shows that around 50% of survivors experience this tonic immobility during an assault. Which means when something like this happens, when they are attacked, the neurobiological response of their body is freeze. The person may be in shock or fear and they cannot fight back. But just because they did not fight back, that does not mean the sex is consensual, hence it becomes rape. The poor victims of assault, when they go through something like this, obviously I know about this neurobiological condition, I learned about this and now I'm telling it to you. But most of the victims who go through this condition are not aware of this condition, and after the rape is over, they keep thinking over and over again, blaming themselves, why didn't they run, why didn't they say anything, they could have done this, they could have done that, while they are completely unaware that in a situation like this, the response doesn't always have to be fight or flight. It's often 50% of the time it is freeze when they are not expecting to be attacked at all and something like this happens. With this, day one of my quick and snappy sexual assault awareness video is over. And
Okay, well, I hope that that kind of explained tonic immobility or the freeze response a little bit better for you. And there's quite a few videos that speaks to tonic immobility or the freeze response. I'm just going to pop back on the PowerPoint here. Okay. All right. So another point to note is thinking the incident was not important enough. I hear clients say this all the time, not sure about how significant what happened was, so that just not wanting to talk about it. And then another one is not being sure if the incident was a crime. And I find in my practice that this topic tend to come up when you're thinking about the parameters of consent. So I'm going to play another video, and it's interesting. It's about a cup of tea, really, but you will get the essence of the video once you've watched it, and it speaks to why consent is important and what consent really truly means. The one thing I'll say before playing the video is that consent is on a spectrum. It's a fluid thing. It is not something that is rigid and you're going to tell me yes now and then that's it. The video will speak more to this, and I hope that it definitely brings out what consent truly should mean and is, and how it impacts or might impact a survivor's life. Just patiently waiting for this to load again.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
Okay. Well, I hope this video provided some insight as it relates to what I was speaking about earlier, as it relates to consent. Let me just stop and share for a second here. And then share again and go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so the next point is fearing having to testify in court. Again, the criminal justice system can re-victimize the victims of or survivors of sexual violence based on the lines of questioning that are used. A lot of the myths that we hear, sometimes, what were you wearing, right? That can insinuate a myth as it relates to sexual violence, kind of, well, victim blaming. So what victim blaming does is, it kind of put the onus on the survivor. And so some of the questions that perpetuates victim blaming are, what were you wearing? Why were you there? Why did you drink so much? All these different questions, right? And people who have recently been sexually assaulted or are considering reporting it, they hear these things and they know that it exists. And so sometimes it's a deterrent for them to want to report to begin with. So, and again, problems in the criminal justice system. An author kind of pulled this out, again, about just the traumatization, like just a re-traumatization that exists within the criminal justice systems when working on cases of sexual assault. All right, so now we'll move on to power and control. So the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services talks about power and control and how it plays a role in the act of a sexual assault, or in cases of sexual assault, rather. So sexual assault is a devastating weapon used to dominate the person that is being assaulted. And for the offender, it's all about achieving or feeling power and control. So many victims feel disempowered even more because of the way the criminal justice system operates. I mean, if we are saying that the perpetrator is taking away power from the survivor, and then you put the survivor in the criminal justice system and you put them on the stand and then you ask them all these questions as if you are questioning the integrity of their testimony, then it removes power from them again. So you kind of see how both of these statements, move hand in hand, because power is removed at one point. You go to the criminal justice system, it does the same. And then this kind of exemplifies what we need to do as social workers when we have survivors of sexual assault coming into our offices, is to provide use whatever support that we can that exemplifies power in them and control over what happens to them and for them next. So anti-oppressive practice, it is about social justice, right? So I picked out a few pieces of it. There's many different definitions, but these apply here. So it is about social justice. And Social Work Code of Ethics, value number 2, speaks on this, right? As it relates to just the social justice side of things. So in a previous slide, we discussed AOP in relation to empowerment and liberation. And so it aligns with the Code of Ethics, value number 2, as it relates to the pursuit of social justice, right? So justice may look different for different survivors. And I said this because sometimes when we think about justice, we think it only means the criminal justice system. And some survivors really they never want to report it. And that's okay. It is their choice to not report if they don't want to. But it's also important to know these things about the criminal justice system, because if a survivor chooses to report, we want to advocate for them being supported in the process. So whether they choose to report or not, their emotional health is important. And so as social workers, we need to do whatever we can in our power to make sure that justice is served, whatever that looks like for the client. So AOP considers how power operates. And we just spoke about power and control. And so because we now know that sexual violence is a crime, sexual assault is a crime that perpetuates power and control for the perpetrator, and it removes that from the survivor, then we can understand that if AOP is focused on how power operates. So one, it kind of focuses on how power is used in it, and we mentioned that earlier, and it also focuses on how you can empower people who are discriminated against, who are oppressed. Like we are seeing here, victims of sexual assault are oppressed in the criminal justice system. And if we are not careful as social workers about how we work with these folks, we can also perpetuate that oppression as well. So the Code of Ethics, value number 1, speaks about, it says to uphold each person's right for self-determination, consistent with that person's capacity and the rights of others, right? So again, power is giving someone the power to speak about who they are, how they feel. Not every person that have experienced sexual assault experiences it the same way. And so AOP, again, it kind of, it's an impetus for providing power to people who have otherwise not had it. And so I'm just trying to, draw the link here between AOP kind of showing us how power operates and giving us ways as it relates to empowering the people who are unempowered, and how the Code of Ethics ties that in here in a neat little bow by saying people have the right to self-determination. So how can AOP show up? And this is where we get into what I would call the action side of things, right? So we can show up in trauma-informed practice as it relates to sexual assault survivors. So trauma-informed practice is something I use at work all the time. And it's really, so trauma-informed social work incorporates core principles of safety, trust, collaboration, choice, and empowerment. And here again, we're seeing where choice and empowerment, is a part of this whole framework of supporting victims of trauma or survivors of trauma. And so we can see that trauma-informed social work can walk hand in hand with anti-oppressive social work. And so this is why I kind of chose trauma-informed practice as a way to say, okay, to usher in the idea of providing support using this framework, because again, it neatly ties with AOP and just what sexual assault does to the survivor to begin with. It just neatly brings us this interesting framework that provides all these different moving pieces that we need to be able to pour into a survivor of sexual violence. It speaks about trust, safety, and if you can think about somebody that have been sexually assaulted, a lot of these things that the trauma-informed practice perpetuates or supports, rather, might be the right word, are a lot of the things that were removed from the survivor in the process of being traumatized. So take action, right? This is where I would say, how do we as social workers show up in a way that is anti-oppressive as it relates to victims of sexual violence? Not everybody works with survivors of sexual assault, but the chances of people disclosing to you in the realm of the work that we do is quite high. And so it's important that we know what it is, how it operates in a survivor's life, and knows a little bit of how to support them, right? So the CASW states that social workers are to advocate for equal treatment of persons under the law and challenge injustices that affect the vulnerable and disadvantaged, right? Sorry. So for equal treatment and protection, my little square was blocking it. Now I can see it. So sexual assault survivors are a part of the vulnerable population, right? There's a lot of research on why they're considered vulnerable, but I think it's kind of a common sense to understand why sexual assault survivors are part of vulnerable populations. They are victims of crime, for sure. So take trainings is one thing I'd say. So ASAS, again, the Association of Alberta Sexual Assault Services, has this wonderful training. Actually, I just got training to be a facilitator for this, and it's called the First Responder to Sexual Assault and Abuse Training through ASAS. So it teaches you how to respond to sexual assault if somebody were to disclose to you, whether it's a child, an adult, or an adult survivor of sexual violence, if it is workplace harassment. It kind of goes through the intricate details. A lot of the information I brought forth today were from the manuals from ASAS or on their website. So if you are interested in this conversation and to kind of bring it further, I'd suggest visiting their website. And trauma-informed trainings. There are a lot of different there's a lot of different, I'd say, webinars out there on trauma-informed work, what it means to work in a trauma-informed space, what it means to be a trauma-informed provider, support person. And I would suggest just doing a little bit of research and looking at that for sure. Continuing taking action to allow people to tell you their story, right? Again, remember value one. It's important that you allow people to tell you their story. So when somebody comes up to you and say, hey, like whatever way they choose to explain that they've been sexually assaulted, it's important for you to be able to sit there, and we talk about this in our practice or in this academic setting quite a bit, about how to show up and to be present, to be fully present, and to listen, right? I think one of our courses last year spoke about being a good listener and allowing the client to tell their narrative, or even if it's your friend, right? So again, just exemplifying value number one. Be empathetic. So, try to put yourself in their shoes and try to understand where they're coming from. It's important. A thing that I left off the slide here, but is the paramount thing that you want to say when somebody discloses, and if I believe you. I believe you, right? I'm sure a lot of us probably are aware of the I believe you campaign. And it is so important that a survivor know that they are believed and they are heard. Be an active bystander. A lot of us probably have friends that they'll say some things and to them they think it's funny because they don't have the knowledge we have, or they don't seek out the knowledge that we tend to seek out as social workers. And they say stuff and we just chuckle, we let it slide by. I implore us as social workers to speak up when you see something, say something. Teach them what you now have learned throughout this presentation, or that you'll research after you've done watching this presentation. Strive for competence. Value number 6 speaks about this in the code of ethics, right? And it's important to, again, we mentioned training before, and that's a part of competence. I'm not suggesting that we all can be competent in every single aspect of the work that we do, but I think be curious enough to gather enough information. So if a client were to disclose to you, or if a friend was to disclose to your family member, you're able to be there for them in an empathetic and a trauma-informed way. So know and provide reporting options, right? Again, not if something happens to someone, don't push them, oh, you got to report, you got to report. If they don't want to, it is their right. And giving them the option to not report is a way that you bring their power back. And that is so important for survivors of sexual violence. Know how to respond to sexual assault disclosures. I mentioned that before, again, about the training. So, looking to that training that I spoke about, the first responder training from ASAS. And even if you don't take that one, look into something else, do a bit more reading, because sexual violence, anything from the scope of sexual violence, it is not like, I'm not saying any crime is lesser or better than the other, but looking into sexual violence and looking into how it affects the survivor, it will go a very long way in helping to debunk some of the myths that exist around sexual violence in general. And it will go a long way in having survivors feel supported, right? It will go a long way in anti-oppressive practice. To fight oppression is to know that it exists and to know how it exists, at least from my perspective. And so I think it's important that we dig deeper into that and understand the intricacies of it to be better able to support those who need our support as social workers. Okay, so to kind of like round this up here, I had the privilege, I didn't speak to 3, I meant to, but I only spoke to 2 of my colleagues. And so both of them actually work on my team in the sexual assault unit at the organization I work for here in Fort McMurray. And the first speaker, so I took their words verbatim and just planted it here. So my question was, how would you like to see AOP or anti-oppressive practice show up when working with survivors of sexual assault? Speaker number 1, who is a BSW, RSW, she said using the power with approach, working with the client to come up with a strategy on how to move forward. The power taken during the abuse is thus given back. And I love how she says that, because in the work that I do, every time I have a session with my client, it's always that I'm not a professional here telling you what to do and how to fix things. We're going to work together in figuring out a way to help you to, self-regulate when you need to, and to fight against, flashbacks and triggers that might come up. It is a partnership. It is not, oh, I'm the professional and I'm going to tell you what to do. So I like that she said that. Speaker number 2 was a diploma in social work and is a registered social worker. Again, she works on my team. She says, I would hope to see implicit biases and stereotypes of sexual violence being checked when working with survivors of sexual violence. Sexual violence is not just a black and white thing, right? Therefore, it requires a degree of understanding and compassion. And I think that is where I'm going to leave this presentation. So thank you so much for listening to me go on and on and on. I'm very passionate about this area of work. Clearly I work in it, so yeah. And here are the references for the information that I shared in this presentation. Again, thank you so much. I hope you learned a lot from it, and I can't wait to hear from you in the discussion section.